Just weeks ago, the Browns' quarterback situation looked like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Sideline tension, public criticism, fans questioning whether the locker room was truly behind its rookie. But now, one of the most important voices on the entire offense has spoken out, and his words may have just shifted the entire narrative around Shedeur Sanders. When your starting offensive lineman backs you publicly, that isn't just support. That's trust. That's credibility. That's a veteran putting his name on your future. And what Joel Bitonio just said about Shedeur Sanders is quietly changing how people inside and outside the organization are looking at this situation. For months, there's been noise, reports of limited reps, rumors that some players favored different quarterbacks, side-eye from fans who weren't sure if the coaching staff truly believed in the kid, and of course, the very public sideline moments that made it seem like chemistry was hanging by a thread. The entire situation has felt fragile, like one wrong move could blow everything up. But Bitonio's comments didn't sound fragile at all. They sounded confident, measured, and more importantly, they sounded like belief. Now fans are asking a much bigger question. Is this the first real sign that the locker room is finally rallying behind Shedeur Sanders? And if so, what does that mean for everyone else who doubted him? Because when the protection in front of you believes in you, everything changes. When Joel Bitonio speaks, people listen. Not because he's loud, not because he seeks attention, but because he's one of the most trusted voices in that locker room. A leader in the trenches. A player who protects the quarterback on every snap and sees everything up close. So when Bitonio stepped in front of a microphone and spoke about Shedeur Sanders, it wasn't just another polite teammate quote. It landed differently. He didn't talk in vague terms. He talked about real growth, about pocket presence, about command, about the little details that don't always show up in the box score, but matter more than anything for a young quarterback trying to survive in the NFL. Bitonio pointed out a specific drive where the Browns leaned heavily on the run game, then took a shot through the air, and Sanders delivered. He highlighted how Shedeur took what the defense gave him, stayed patient, and executed the simple plays instead of forcing something reckless. But the most telling part wasn't even about the throws. It was about the huddle. Bitonio said Shedeur's presence in the huddle has noticeably improved over the last few weeks. The command, the communication, the way he's getting everyone on the same page. For a rookie, that's massive. That's the difference between a quarterback who's just surviving and one who's starting to lead. And then there's the timing of all this. Earlier in the season, there were quiet doubts, rumors that some players felt more comfortable with other quarterbacks, questions about whether Shedeur was fully trusted yet. All of that made Bitonio's comments feel like a turning point. Because you don't publicly praise a young quarterback's leadership unless you genuinely believe in what you're seeing. What's also important is why this praise matters so much. Offensive linemen see everything most fans don't. They feel pressure collapse. They see how a quarterback moves in the pocket. They hear how he talks when the play breaks down. Their approval isn't emotional. It's practical. So when Bitonio backs Shedeur, it sends a quiet message across the building. Growth is real, progress is happening, and maybe, just maybe, the story around this rookie is starting to change. But what makes this even more interesting is how sharply this contrasts with what the locker room reportedly looked like earlier this season. Just a few weeks ago, the tone around Shedeur Sanders inside the Browns' orbit felt very different. There was uncertainty in the air, whispers that he hadn't fully earned the trust of everyone yet, rumors circulating online that some veterans were more comfortable with other quarterbacks in the room. None of that was ever confirmed outright. But the tension was easy to feel. The body language, the limited reps, the constant week-to-week language from the coaching staff. It all created the perception that Shedeur was still on trial. And fair or not, that perception stuck. Early in the season, reports suggested that Sanders wasn't consistently getting first unit work. Instead of building rhythm with starters, he was often rotating, forced to develop chemistry in fragments rather than full sequences. That's devastating for a young quarterback. Timing, trust, and anticipation are built through repetition, and without that repetition, every game feels like a cold start. At the same time, fans noticed something else. The emotional temperature around the quarterback room felt uneven. Other quarterbacks seemed to get more patience, more protection, more grace for mistakes. Meanwhile, Shedeur's margin for error felt razor thin. One missed throw would spark weeks of debate. One rough series would reignite questions about whether he was truly ready. Again, these are perceptions shaped by reports, fan analysis, and media coverage, not confirmed internal stances. But perception in the NFL is powerful. It shapes confidence, it shapes locker room hierarchy, and it shapes who feels empowered to lead. That's why Bitonio's comments hit with such force. They didn't sound cautious. They didn't sound like forced optimism. They sounded firm, confident, deliberate. The words of a veteran who has watched something change with his own eyes. And that raises a chilling possibility for everyone who doubted Shedeur earlier in the year. What if the locker room was slower to believe than the growth itself? Because when a locker room shifts from quiet skepticism to public support, it usually means the evaluation phase is over, and belief has officially begun. But belief alone doesn't erase tension. And that tension had already shown itself in one of the most uncomfortable moments of the season. What makes Joel Bitonio's praise feel so powerful isn't just what he said, it's when he said it. Because the timing couldn't be more loaded. This is the same team that not long ago was dealing with very public tension on the sideline. The same rookie quarterback who was being visibly confronted in front of cameras. The same offense that looked disconnected at crucial moments. All of that was still fresh in everyone's mind when Bitonio spoke up. That's why this doesn't feel like a routine teammate compliment. It feels like a response. When that sideline moment went viral, it created a dangerous narrative that Shedeur Sanders wasn't fully respected yet, that veterans were frustrated with him, that the locker room might be splintering instead of tightening around its young quarterback. Whether those assumptions were fair or not, that was the story people ran with. And in the NFL, ... Stories can be just as damaging as reality if they go unchecked. Then Bitonio stepped in. Instead of deflecting, instead of politicking, instead of giving a safe, nothing answer, he talked about leadership, about command, about improvement, about trust in the pocket. Those are not accidental words. Those are the exact qualities people were questioning after the confrontation. And that's what changed the temperature. It's one thing for a coach to defend a quarterback. That's expected. It's another thing entirely for a veteran offensive lineman to do it. Linemen don't benefit from hype. They benefit from stability, from predictability, from a quarterback who keeps them out of bad situations. So when a lineman publicly backs his quarterback, it's not emotional loyalty, it's functional loyalty. It's also a subtle rebuke to the chaos. Without naming anyone, Bitonio's comments reframed the entire situation. Instead of a rookie under fire, he presented a quarterback evolving. Instead of discord, he highlighted synchronization. Instead of frustration, he pointed to progress. And that shift matters, because once a locker room starts publicly reinforcing its quarterback, the perception changes fast. Doubt quiets down. Internal noise loses power. And the rookie stops looking like a temporary solution and starts looking like the plan. But even with this new wave of support, one uncomfortable truth still lingers in the background. Belief doesn't protect you from performance, and performance is where the pressure always returns. Public support is powerful, but in the NFL, it only buys you time, not security. Joel Bitonio's praise may have shifted the narrative around Shedeur Sanders, Parentheses. But belief alone doesn't lock in a future. Performance does. Every snap, every read, every throw still carries the same weight as before. The difference now is that the spotlight is even brighter. With belief comes expectation. When a respected veteran endorses a young quarterback the way Bitonio just did, it subtly raises the standard. It tells the locker room, "This is our guy right now." And once that message circulates, the margin for excuses shrinks. Now the question isn't whether Shedeur deserves patience. It's whether he can turn promise into production quickly enough to justify the trust being placed in him. And that pressure is real. Defenses now have tape. They adjust faster. They test young quarterbacks with disguised coverages, delayed pressures, and looks designed specifically to bait mistakes. Every defensive coordinator wants to be the one who proves the hype wrong. That's the reality Sanders is stepping into. But here's what quietly works in his favor. Bitonio didn't just praise arm talent or athleticism. He praised pocket presence, decision-making, and command. Those are the exact traits that help quarterbacks survive when defenses start hunting them. Pocket presence keeps drives alive. Taking the easy throws keeps the offense on schedule. Command in the huddle stabilizes chaos. These aren't flashy traits, they're survival traits. Still, the production has to follow. Fans watching at home don't grade progress in footwork or communication. They grade touchdowns, wins, and late-game execution. If the stat lines don't improve, the same voices that are beginning to soften right now will swing back to skepticism just as fast as they changed position. That's how quickly the NFL turns. There's also another layer that can't be ignored. Patience inside the building doesn't always match patience outside of it. Coaches feel pressure from ownership, veterans feel pressure from contracts and career windows, and rookies feel pressure from timelines they don't always control. Even with growing internal belief, the calendar never stops moving. That's why this moment feels so fragile. Shedeur Sanders has momentum right now, real momentum. Veteran support, growing confidence, quiet optimism from people who see him every day. But momentum is only useful if it's converted into results on the field. Otherwise, it becomes just another almost. And the next test won't be theoretical. It will be live, televised, judged in real time. Because the belief is here now. What comes next will decide whether it stays. Joel Bitonio's words didn't just boost confidence, they shifted leverage. And in the NFL, leverage quietly decides futures long before official announcements do. When a veteran cornerstone publicly backs a young quarterback, it makes one thing very clear. Benching that quarterback becomes a political decision, not just a football one. Up until now, Shedeur Sanders existed in uncertainty, week-to-week language, rotating reps, constant public debate. All of that kept his job security fragile. Even a decent performance could be reframed as not enough. But veteran endorsement changes how that conversation happens behind closed doors. Now, if the coaching staff considers pulling him, they're no longer making that call in a vacuum. They'd be contradicting a respected leader in the locker room. They'd be risking the message that veteran trust doesn't matter. And in a league built on hierarchy and buy-in, that's dangerous. It also flips the burden of proof. Before, Shedeur had to prove he belonged. Now, the staff would have to prove he doesn't. And that's a subtle but massive shift in power dynamics. The evaluation phase begins to close. The investment phase begins to open. This is exactly how young quarterbacks quietly become the guy before the headlines ever declare it. First comes veteran protection. Then comes increased responsibility. Then comes long-term commitment. And there's another uncomfortable truth for the coaching staff. The more veterans rally behind Shedeur, the harder it becomes to limit him without backlash. If protection breaks down, teammates will expect adjustments. If chemistry wavers, they'll expect more reps. If mistakes happen, they'll expect patience, the same patience veterans receive. That doesn't mean Shedeur is untouchable. It means the standard has changed. Now it's no longer, is he ready? It's, are we giving him everything he needs to succeed? And that question cuts directly into roster decisions, practice structure, play calling philosophy, and future draft planning. Because once a locker room starts treating a rookie like a long-term quarterback, everything else bends around that reality. But this security is still conditional. One bad stretch doesn't erase belief, but a pattern can. And the next game won't just be about his development. It will be about whether this growing support turns into permanent trust or fades back into uncertainty just as quickly as it arrived. What was already an important game just became a measuring stick for Shedeur Sanders' future. Because across the field now stands Cam Ward, another young quarterback with hype, momentum, and national attention. And whether people admit it or not, this matchup is already being framed as a comparison. Not officially, not on the stat sheet, but in perception, Cam Ward represents the other path, a quarterback many fans believe should already be the guy, confident, aggressive, given full control of his offense. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders is still fighting through layers of doubt, development talk, and cautious handling. When these two take the field against each other, it won't feel like just another game. It will feel like a referendum. For Shedeur, this is the kind of stage that reshapes narratives overnight. One clean performance can silence months of skepticism. One rough outing can undo weeks of progress. That's how unforgiving nationally watched matchups are for young quarterbacks. They compress time. What normally takes half a season to evaluate gets judged in 60 minutes. And that's exactly why Bitonio's praise matters even more now. Because heading into a pressure game like this with veteran belief in your corner is the difference between playing tight and playing free. Confidence changes footwork, changes decisiveness. It changes how quickly you pull the trigger on throws. When a quarterback knows the protection unit trusts him, he stops trying to be perfect and starts trying to be effective. But make no mistake, this won't be a friendly evaluation. Defenses will test Shedeur early. Confusion looks, late pressure, tight windows. They'll try to shake him before the confidence settles in. Because if they crack that belief in the first quarter, they know doubt can creep back in fast. And the outside noise will be louder than ever. If Cam Ward lights it up while Shedeur struggles, the comparisons will flood social media instantly. If Shedeur outplays Ward, the narrative flips just as fast. There will be no patience in the public conversation, only reaction. This game is not deciding Shedeur's entire career, but it will decide the next chapter of it. Because after this, the potential phase gives way to the proof phase in the eyes of the league. And once the proof phase begins, nothing moves slowly anymore. Joel Bitonio's comments may not trend like a viral sideline clip, but they might end up meaning far more in the long run. Because in the NFL, real change rarely arrives with fireworks. It arrives quietly, through trust, through veterans shifting their tone, through the people in the trenches deciding who they believe in when the noise gets loud. For Shedeur Sanders, this moment represents more than praise. It represents credibility. A rookie doesn't earn that through press conferences or highlight clips alone. He earns it when the players whose careers depend on him feel safer with him behind center. And Bitonio's words suggest that safety is beginning to form. But this story is still fragile. Belief is growing, not solidified. Momentum is building, not guaranteed. Every young quarterback lives in that narrow space between promise and proof. And once the locker room begins to lean in your direction, the expectations shift with it. Support becomes scrutiny. Faith becomes demand. What makes this so compelling is the contrast. Just weeks ago, the narrative around Shedeur felt tense and uncertain. Now, one of the most respected voices on the offense is publicly naming his growth. That doesn't erase the doubts overnight, but it does change who gets the benefit of the doubt the next time something goes wrong. And that's where the real pressure begins. The Cam Ward matchup will test all of this, not just Shedeur's arm, but his composure, not just the playbook, but the trust between him and the people protecting him. One game won't define his career, but it will define the next stretch of it. The conversations, the patience, the direction the Browns choose to lean. What we're watching now isn't a quarterback battle, it's a transition period. From evaluation to investment, from question mark to possible cornerstone. And those transitions only happen once. If Shedeur continues to grow, continues to command the huddle, continues to earn the trust of people like Bitonio, this praise will be remembered as the first public signal that everything changed. If he stumbles, the same voices that are beginning to believe will demand answers just as loudly. That's the reality of the NFL. But right now, for the first time in a while, the momentum is pointing forward. And what happens next will decide whether this becomes the rise of a franchise quarterback or just another almost.